Hi everyone, welcome to episode 7 of Closing Time with Pat and Dennis. We are very much looking forward to you listening to the conversation we had with Anne Pow. And this episode is a little bit different than normal. So Pat, do you want to tell them about this episode?
Sure. Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, so in this episode, we actually had so much great information from Anne that we decided to break it into two sessions. The first session, we're going to be discussing assessing the effectiveness of your go-to-market and the alignment of your organization. And then in session 2, or the second episode, we're going to talk about how to successfully either operationalize or implement this to ensure that you have alignment and that you get the successful outcome that you're looking for. So hopefully you get a lot out of this and enjoy.
We're here today with Anne Pow, and we are absolutely delighted to have Anne on the show to talk about go-to-market alignment. And Anne brings a lot of experience to the conversation today. She's the founder and CEO of Ignite Consulting, and she's done a lot of fractional RevOps work, CRO work, and more in terms of go-to-market. So welcome, Anne. We're excited to have you today.
Thanks. And Dennis, you forgot, we've all worked together before.
We've all worked together before. A big one I forgot. So yes, Pat, Anne, and I've had the pleasure to work together, and we look forward to talking about that and other areas that we have in terms of expertise. So welcome, Anne.
We're very aligned because I agreed to still do this podcast, right? So there you go.
Yeah. Did we scare you off here?
Yeah. Great. So Anne, let's jump right into it then. First off, in your experience of go-to-market leadership, working across multiple businesses, particularly in B2B technology, how do you first identify the largest opportunities for an organization once you inherit a team or start a go-to-market project?
Yeah, great question. So I kind of tend to have a bit of a formula. I've used it when I've been in-house in multiple organizations. I did it when we worked together at Tubular Labs and many organizations since. I do it with all of my fractional clients, really kind of getting like a read on the current state of what's happening in the organization. And there's a few different ways that I do this. So current state, a diagnostic, really a set of observations. I'm a very data-oriented leader. So and some of that data is qualitative data. So first I do a deep listening tour with, the executive leadership, the go-to-market leadership, their deputies. I also like to maybe go one level down, really just having a lot of conversations around what people's functions are in the go-to-market, where they're really struggling, where they see opportunity. And it's a little bit like almost like a research project, if you will. I'm having all these qualitative conversations. I'm also then buttressing it with usually a survey to really understand like what I think are like the core tenets of a strong go-to-market. And then if I'm coming in with RevOps, what I think a RevOps function is really required to do. So I kind of also get that in terms of a more quantitative assessment. I then take that and I marry it up against, kind of like a frame diagnostic that I use in all my organizations for what I think a go-to-market organization should have at a certain point of scale. So then I kind of have like a quantitative rating of where are they with respect from, strategy, sales process, life cycle, to how are they actually operating and aligning as a team with respect to goal setting, OKR development, roadmap development, target setting. You would think a lot of these are very well aligned, but the truth is that often I go in and it's actually the opposite. And that's fine. That's why they usually require a head of RevOps. It's not that people aren't working hard. It's usually as people progress in their maturity in a go-to-market, going from like a startup to a scale up to, a grown-up startup. The emphasis changes over time, where there's a much greater emphasis early on product. And then the emphasis needs to shift towards more around go-to-market and go-to-market alignment. So I usually like go in to try and assess where are they on this curve? Are they kind of really stuck in siloed approaches to go-to-market, as opposed to really the goal is to get them all operating as a single unit? So I'm just going to pause, see if you have anything you want to dig into there.
I have a question for you, Anne. So I know whenever we would go into the various companies and come in and do our assessment and surveying and kind of understanding the nuts and bolts of the process and, the go-to-market strategy and things like that. But are you seeing areas where there's some consistency on where I'll say you're seeing that the alignment is breaking down when you come in?
Oh, we lost Pat. Technical issue. I know what you're saying though, Pat. Yes, where the alignment was breaking down and kind of what the patterns are. I do. And what's been really interesting is, so I work with clients at all different stages. I mean, some even as early as seed, it's probably frankly too early, but A, B, C, D public companies and across lots of different industries. So obviously heavily emphasized on tech, but different aspects of tech, outside of tech. And what I found to be recurring is the key thing that really breaks down is the juncture and the pass of the funnel. So really it's the pass of the funnel from the marketing funnel to the sales funnel, and then the sales funnel to the customer funnel, right? And what I usually find is one, somebody stood these things up. Who knows when? Often people don't know. They're usually not
Yeah.
anymore. Two, no, maybe they were at a point of maturity when it was really early when it got so they just had to get something set up and like throw it out there that actually maybe they weren't actually employing best practice in terms of, how do they define a lead? How do you manage a lead through? How do you define an MQL? The number of organizations I go into that are like, we're not going to have any lead scoring. Oh, that's great. So when you're just like surging a bunch of leads over to your sales team and you're wondering why your conversion rate is so low. So it's these pretty like foundational elements that need to be addressed: marketing funnel redesign, sales funnel redesign, customer funnel. But every time what I find is that they're actually divorced, and the teams that are building out these pieces of the funnel sit in separate functions, and no one is really thinking about the handover. And that needs to really be done in partnership with the two teams that own each side of it. So that is like, I've had to redo those in every single organization I've ever been a part of.
And with that, like, is a lot of the time you're not only looking at like how the teams are aligned and everything, but the connecting technology or processes as well? Like, do you have to make recommendations around that as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. Usually when I come in, especially in a RevOps team, a lot of people blame the system.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yes. And it's easy to blame the system, right?
and it's the thing
Yeah.
that they see, right? It's like
Yeah.
the last thing. Like the system is a manifestation or a representation of the process, right? And usually they're like, our systems are totally broken. I'm like, well, that's just a symptom. We actually
Yeah.
have to get to the deeper root of the problem. And so usually when I'm like, okay, well, example. Okay, show me what your sales process looks like. I've worked with an organization where every time they got to close one, they couldn't close one an opportunity. And then they were really, really held up from close winning opportunities. So they were delaying onboarding, which was immediately impacting their recognition of revenue. Like big problem, right? And it was like, well, why does this keep happening? Why does this keep happening? Like, well, we don't have the data. I'm like, well, why don't you have the data? Trace it back. Oh, we don't have the data because we aren't asking for this. Oh, well, actually, we do ask for this, but we don't require it. Oh, and we haven't trained the teams. I'm like, aha. So you haven't defined the process. You haven't told the teams. You haven't forced it and built in governance. So of course the data is wrong. And of course you are not able to capture it. And of course you are then not able to close one opportunity and thereby not onboard a customer. But you have to go all the way back to that starting point, which, let's be real, I am, I guess, a consultant. I mean, I like to say I'm an embedded expert or fractional executive. And sometimes people hear the word process or consultant, and there's a real allergic reaction to it. Oh, don't come at me with your process, Anne. I'm like, the process is the key. If we start with a really good process and it's very, very clear, and then we think about what does this actually mean in terms of what we're going to build into the system, and don't stop there. Once we build it into the system, does it make sense to the people who have to use that system every single day? Do they actually know how to use the system? So there's a UX component as well, right?
Yeah. Great. And on that point about the people then and getting alignment across the organization, do you find, particularly as like going in as a consultant, do you have to, you have to get buy-in from the CEO in smaller company? Who are usually those stakeholders that you're brought in if it's not the CEO? And how do you work in getting alignment between everyone?
Yeah. I'm going to tell you where I've done this really well and where I've, AKA SHIT the bed, like did not do it well because I think they point to the same thing. Generally you definitely need an executive who is really charged with, making and can empower me as a fractional to really lead the go-to-market or play a critical role in the go-to-market. Sometimes that is a CRO, sometimes that is a CMO. Sometimes it is a CEO. So it really is going to depend on like the organizational structure. If you don't have, I like to think if you do not have an executive in there that is in charge of the go-to-market and you have like VPs that all report to the CEO, you probably need to be going to the CEO, right? And I have made the mistake of not doing that and then being like, oh, CEO, tap, tap, tap. I'm fractional. I am not like, even though I want to be treated as your team, I need you to empower me to be treated as an equal member of your team and champion the change that we're going to need to execute. And only the CEO can do that. right? And so you need to be like, who is really in charge of the go to market? Go to that level. When I have done that, it's gone very, very well. So organizations, there was one organization, I was a CRO, I was a fractional CRO, and I was given, this was part of my due diligence. When I joined, it was, you will be part of the executive team. I will treat you no different. You run the organization, you make the decisions. And like, yes, you have to align with your executive peers, but there was such empowerment to be able to be decisive and to move fast and know that I had the backing of the CEO. And as a result, our team was able to do incredible work in a very short period of time. Whereas when I have not had that empowerment from the CEO, or other one, maybe I had the empowerment from the CEO, but he or she forgot to tell the rest of the team. That's where
Yeah.
it like get a little bit harder out the gate for a fractional executive.
Okay. And on the point about like sales and marketing, is do you typically find that there's different leaders for those organizations, or a lot of organizations are combining like the person to look after both of those remits, like more go to market?
I would like it to happen. I think there should be like a head of go to market. If you really, really want to unify, I'd be curious what you both think. But I do typically see there's marketing and there's sales and there's a different leader. But I think, Pat, when we worked together, you were the CRO. I reported to you. I was the head of RevOps. But I remember you saying, but you were dotted line to Neil, who is the chief commercial officer who looked after marketing and product. And so I really felt like I could challenge you, my direct boss, CRO, to be like, we have to think about this other aspect. I don't think all leaders are like that. They're not all like Pat. And I think, though, it's really critical if you have a reporting line that is separate from the other side of the go to market to ensure that you have the empowerment to really straddle the full go to market. It needs to come from the leader you report to and hopefully the other leader that you're going to support.
And two things on that. So it kind of relates a little bit to that first question I asked you, Ian. But to me, when we were doing this together and in my other experiences and even into my subsequent experiences with some of these companies that I've been helping out, is RevOps is really unifying the entire customer lifecycle. That's what it does for the company. Right. It's not just for sales and not just for marketing. It's for the entire company. It's for product. It's everybody, right? Customer support and everything. That is the unifier for the company. And so where I've experienced, I'll call it alignment breaking down when we've been in these various companies, is when each of the, regardless of who you report into of a customer facing issue, whether you're the CMO and you don't report into the CRO, or you do, or customer success doesn't report into the CRO or sales or whatever it happens to be, right? Where it typically breaks down on alignment is if each of those teams' highest level goals are not cascaded from the company level goals as it relates to customers. That's where you start. And so to your point, and it's like, you can all of a sudden, why you probably were most successful when you were empowered by a CEO is because they are the ones that own the company level goals, and you were helping them to get the rest of the customer facing organizations aligned to those. Right? Does that make sense? So it's like, it's a really important point that, for those of you who are listening to this, it's like, she's spot on. It's like, if you can get this thing aligned at the highest level, at the company level goals, or you can get it cascaded from there so that you can get your teams going, whether it's their processes or it's their whatever metrics and KPIs they're using related to the customer, that's how you get alignment. You get everybody involved in it, and you get everybody to acknowledge it. And then you're not getting siloed, traction, things like that. Right. I mean, it's exactly what you say.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, I agree. I think something that we did at Tuber, which was quite good actually, were those like quarterly sessions. There was
Yes.
like, okay, looking back, looking forward, even though sometimes I guess there might be finger pointing and stuff a little bit, but at least it was kind of, if there was any like sales, marketing, or other departments going in a different direction, it was like pulling it all back together,
Yes.
which I think is very useful. Yep.
I want to come back to that because, again, you talked like, what are the core problems that I see across the different organizations I worked in and the clients? And I said, okay, breakdown in the funnel, pass off between team. But
Mm.
it's this aspect around goal setting. And, it's fascinating in that so so many companies want this like really scientific advanced answer. And when I tell them it's actually like goal setting and let's just dial it back and go back to the basics, they're like, really? I'm like, yeah, that's what it is. But the number of times I go into an organization, and I'm a big believer in OKRs, and I'm not a believer in like we do an OKRs to check a tick box. It's like, you know, OKRs should be tied to how you compensate certain individuals, unless you're in sales, which obviously you're tied to like the performance of the company. Like RevOps, I have been, as you all know, tied my variable, my team zero will tie to net ARR. In other times when we expanded, it was like 50% net ARR, 50% OKR, maybe MBO achievement, right? And I think this is key because then the like diligence that we put into this OKR development was really, really critical. And so you bring up that point around these quarterly sessions, which for those listening, we had quarterly internal QBRs. And the way that they were structured was, we had an internal one for like the CRO staff. So like Pat's team, which was like sales and CS and RevOps and pre-sales and enablement all together. And when I think about how those went, we would all come up with our goals and we would come together. And Dennis, I actually remember one where I came up with, here are the goals that I think the OKRs RevOps should do and support. And I can't remember specifically what the OKR was. And I presented them. And you, as my peer, were like, Ann, I actually disagree. I don't think this is the most important to help us with a go to market. And it was good because you know what we were doing? We were having that debate together as a team out in the front. And often what I see happen in these fractured organizations is they're having these debates in private, as opposed to say the things together and we're going to learn. And I remember I took your feedback and it was a really helpful session. And I changed the OKRs for the quarter so that when we walked out of that session, we as the CRO organization were very aligned to what we needed to do. And then we did the same with the wider go-to-market. And then product and eng saw it. So we could catch all of these aspects. I mean, I have seen, for example, in organizations, more product-led growth organizations, product teams just crushing it in terms of deployment and new things that they're shipping. And then what happens? They're like, we're just going to deploy it and it's going to get put into the production and the customer's going to see it and be so excited. And the customer success team's like, whoa, 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 whoa. What is all of this stuff? The customers are overwhelmed. And actually, you just deployed all of these things without letting us know. And I could have used this as a hook to help manage my upcoming renewal and maybe the price increase. But it was so disconnected. And these are the things that you hope to catch. I'm going to get off my soapbox now.
I think that's excellent, Ann, because I was just going to ask you. So you were talking about, aligning around your KPIs and what are the important goals that these KPIs support, things like that. So I have a bias, but I'd be curious to hear from you. What do you think are kind of like the top critical KPIs that you should be measuring? And part of this, and I'm going to kind of lead you a little bit with this, but because I think the ones that you're probably going to suggest are also the ones that you can use to help justify for the organization why it's so critical that you have this unifying RevOps organization to help you in driving revenue. Because to your point, I've seen companies where a lot of times they'll say, well, let's just raise quotas so we can generate more revenue, or let's just get more products out there so we can raise revenue. And that ends up backfiring on them.
Oh, that works really well.
Big way.
Sellers love it when you raise quotas on them without.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but a lot of teams have tried to do that. And it's just like, wow, bad idea. But anyway, my question is so what do you see as the KPIs that are really important in terms of the context of the goals that you think are the ones that are most successfully driving the revenue and the effectiveness of it?
Sure. I mean, well, it is going to depend on the stage of the company that you're in and what is going well and what is not. And I'll share something that I've observed recently that I think is like a sign of the times that we're in, given where we're at with, the economy. I mean, it's rough for people in tech, layoffs, it's getting harder and harder to sell and to get people to really want to buy software. So when we worked together, it was, net ARR and NRR. You still absolutely want to look at that. That was our North Star. But what I'm really hearing about a lot more in the go-to-market circles that I play in is GRR. And GRR, gross revenue retention, because they're like, you can't hide. Like you cannot hide with expansion if people are churning. And because churn has been such a big problem, that right now is the metric that most CROs I know are looking at even over NR. I mean, I think you have to look at both. When I talk to CFOs, they're like, you need to look at both. I'm like, of course you need to look at both. But I am seeing GRR come up in a lot more conversations with greater frequency. than probably 4 or 5 years ago when it was like ZIRP era, zero interest rates for others that did not know that. I had to look it up a few months ago. And so that's one. But also, so I think you want like one overarching goal that's going to really evaluate how your full revenue team is doing with respect to ideally thinking about not just growth, but also your churn and your downgrades and your expansion, et cetera. But also, maybe your organization has a really, really hard problem with pipeline generation. I like to say that you can get really, really great at conversion, but it's a lot harder to get more efficient. And so there's only two levers that are going to help you hit your goal. You either get more efficient, you get better at conversion, which means you have to get that whole wheel operating a lot, and that's going to take time. The other one is you generate more pipe. Right? And so I think you have to have a pipeline generation goal. Like you taught me this metric, Pat. I had never looked at pipe yield rate. I looked at win rate, but pipe yield rate was helpful because it obviously evaluated that like pipe shifts. Like sometimes it gets stale. And so by looking at not just win rate, but yield rate, in organizations where I'd been in where they're like, "Oh, our win rate's been really, really great." I'm like, "But you're winning off your newer deals and your older pipeline that is staying like in the pipeline is actually just getting more and more and more stale, and you're not generating enough new pipeline to account for the fact that you have all this old pipeline that is really cluttering everything." And so I think you have to have a pipeline generation goal. You obviously have to have an attainment goal for your sales side. I mean, I do think that I'll bring up one more thing because you have to think about the marketing to the sales funnel as well. And there are a lot
Mm.
of thoughts around, do I do marketing influence or do I do MQL? And, that's where I see a lot of debate happen between marketing and sales leaders. My perspective, and I've talked to CMOs about this as well, the CMO and the CRO are held to the same pipeline goal, period. We did this at Tubular. Every organization I've done it with, it just made people realize we're on the same team and we're going to be held to, the S1 pipe goal, meaning the amount of pipeline that actually enters the sales funnel that people are going to work. And that maybe came from marketing, hopefully a whole lot. Maybe it came from sales, but if you hold everyone to that goal, that's more critical than how many leads or how many MQLs or I don't even know what marketing influence means. I mean, I do, but it doesn't feel like a metric that people can get their heads around unless you're in marketing and you're trying to justify investment. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate for that comment.
No, but it's true, Anne. I mean, you have to, it's back to what we were talking about earlier, right? If everybody isn't held to the same high level goals that the CEO is establishing for your organization as it relates to the customer, whether that's on the, I'll call it attraction and engagement, call it the pipeline, or it's on the acquisition, call it the growth side, or it's on the expansion and retention, call it the customer, long-term customer value. If everybody's held to those same goals and KPIs like you're talking about, it breaks down. The alignment breaks down, and then it just becomes silos, and everybody thinks they're doing a good job, and everybody's working hard, but you're all not going to get to the same destination, right? Somebody's going to end up in, somewhere out in the South Pacific, and somebody's going to end up in, Canada and whatever, right? So,
But on that point about marketing influence, like my feeling is it's getting harder and harder to measure a lot of that, unless like it's maybe the first touch point or something.
Right.
Like,
And then it's like, what's your attribution model? And then you go down that whole rabbit hole of, well, are we a first touch? Are we a last touch? Are we a multi-touch? And I'm like, oh God, are we really going to go down this path? Versus it's not that those aren't important, but what is your primary top tier KPI? All these other things are secondary. There are things you're going to measure. Marketing needs to measure that in terms of where they're going to deploy their dollars and where they're going to invest. But it was the top company level metric that the CEO is going to be like, this is what we're looking at every single week. This is how we're going to measure the effectiveness of the go-to-market as a single unit. And I think if you do that, again, it starts the go-to-market. I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, the Pavilion Conference, with a bunch of go-to-market leaders. And there was the first day that I was there was a women's summit of also go-to-market leaders. And there was a really big conversation around first team thinking and first team mentality. And I so deeply believe in this. It's about like, who is your first team? It's not I as the CRO, let's say, my whole sales team. My first team is the CRO and the CMMO and, the chief product. That is my first team. VP level, who's your first team. So you have to be super aligned because that is the lane in which you are executing and collaborating across the board. And too many times, I think if you have these more organizational level KPIs, it just encourages you to have loyalty to the team below you than the team across horizontally.
So hopefully you got a lot of our first episode with Anne. And if you enjoyed that, section 2 is going to even be better because you're going to learn how to successfully either operationalize or implement this to ensure that you have alignment to your goals and your organization in order to hit the outcomes you're looking for. So enjoy.